and they didn't broadcast that type of thing. Okay? I think one thing Steve said to you that I think is very important to understand is this deal at the Fetterman fight where they planned out that strategy was very unusual. That wasn't what they did. And they wouldn't fight if they had a bad vision or thought they would be killed. They fought on the defensive most of the time because they had to grow another warrior. The army just went and grabbed another, drafted another one. It was a different deal. So life was much more precious. Now, the wounded men from Reno's command, obviously there weren't any wounded from Custer's command, they had to survive a painful 15-mile journey by mule to the mouth of the Little Bighorn River where the far west had stopped. Remember, it was in the mouth of Rosebud? It went to the mouth, went down the Yellowstone to the mouth of the Little Bighorn, and that's where those soldiers were taken, 15-mile mule wagon ride. The wounded were taken aboard the Far West. That happened on June 30th. So how many days after they were shot or killed? It could have been 25th, 26th, so a few days afterwards. When they got them on board, the Far West steamed down the Bighorn to the Yellowstone River and made its way 700-mile journey back on the Yellowstone to Bismarck, North Dakota. And they arrived there, they didn't arrive there, they started there on July 4th. And they arrived at Bismarck the next night of July 5th. It took them 54 hours and 710 minutes from the mouth of the Little Bighorn back to Bismarck with those particular wounded. Crew jumped off, ran all around town in Bismarck spreading the news. How do you think Libby Custer received the news? Where's she at? Which fort?
Lincoln.
She's at Fort Lincoln. Okay, she's sitting in her house quilting with several other women, including Maggie Calhoun. Mrs. Custer was informed by military personnel who then asked her to go with the soldiers to help inform the other women of their husbands' deaths. Other women lost their husbands, obviously. Libby agreed. She turned to Margaret Calhoun after receiving the news and said, quote, "We must pack now. We are not in the army anymore." That was what she said. She took the news pretty stoic. Well, obviously, word of this disastrous defeat of George Armstrong Custer and the mighty 7th Cavalry flashed all over the nation. Blame began to circulate. And the sad thing was, it was 1876, the 100th birthday for the United States. It was a time for celebration, not embarrassing news. And Custer wanted to bring back this birthday present for the country, this big victory over the Sioux Cheyenne Indians at Little Bighorn. He thought it might bolster his political aspirations to be president. Turned out to be a disaster. Well, who plays the biggest part in any Custer controversy? Who's going to make a controversy out of things? Who always does? Anyway, I don't care if it's Kennedy assassination, I don't care if it's a Lincoln assassination, I don't care if it's Watergate. Who fuels the fire for controversy? The press. Very good. And the inaccuracy of the papers occurred because there was no press coverage, right? The Terry column only had one newspaper person on the campaign. Okay? Why did they send a lot of correspondence on that campaign? Who didn't want him there? Grant. Because he was afraid what Custer might do or say with the press at his side, and he didn't like Custer. Now, there was one, this is kind of an interesting story. There was one correspondent by the name of Clement Lounsbury. He was the editor of the Bismarck Tribune. And he was given special permission by General Terry to report the entire campaign of 1876. Well, he had illness within his family that prevented him from going, so he sent his assistant, Mark Kellogg, in his place. Well, Kellogg wasn't stupid. He knew the news would be where who was? Custer. So he stuck close to Custer, and he did send some reports back to Bismarck, okay? Well, on June 29, 1876, Colonel Gibbon found Kellogg's body in the deep ravine we talked about, where E Troop had been slaughtered. And his notes were later found on the battlefield, and his death prevented all from knowing what really happened that day. If he survives, if Kellogg survives, we know what happened at the Little Bighorn, but he doesn't. That's why it's such a mystery. So, what are the final resting stops for these people we talked about? Let's talk about it. Where's George Armstrong Custer buried? West Point. And did you listen to Steve? Hell, they don't even know if they got him. Think about this. You bury somebody 18 inches deep. That's about like this. You couldn't even fit my body in a hole 18 inches deep. And you don't think that they were within hours scavenged by animals? You know they were. So what's left of his remains, when they went back to re-enter him at West Point and re-enter the others on top of the hill, they couldn't even find a complete skeleton of the guy. Okay? Where's Tom Custer buried? Anybody know? He's buried in Fort Leavenworth National Cemetery in Kansas. Okay? Remember G.W. Yates? Remember that name? He also went to Fort Leavenworth National Cemetery. W.W. Cook, the guy with the sideburns, was originally buried at Custer Battlefield National Cemetery, where you placed the flags, but they exhumed him and buried him in Hamilton, Ontario, because he was from Canada. But he was originally buried at the battlefield. Miles Keogh was buried in Fort Hill Cemetery in Auburn, New York. Boston Custer and Audie Reed. Where'd they rebury them after they buried him originally at the site? What do you think? Where are they from? Civilians from where? Where's Custer from? Livy Custer from? And where's George Custer from? Monroe, Michigan. So that's where those two are buried, in Monroe, Michigan. As mentioned by Steve, in 1881 they put that big granite memorial, the War Department did, at the top of Custer Hill, and the remains of the 7th Cavalry were collected from their shallow graves and re-entered in that mass grave under that granite memorial. It was in 1890 that Army personnel began the process of erecting white marble markers at the original grave sites, stating that various soldiers fell here. And remember what Steve told you? These guys didn't have any interest in history. They had interest in getting the job done. Now, I don't know if you caught his story, but it was a good one. You saw a lot of places where two markers were right next to each other. Did you get the idea that they would dig in and throw the dirt here, and dig in and throw the dirt here, and dig in and throw the dirt here, and then putting talon in here, and then covering talon up, and they didn't get all the dirt, so when they came up later and saw this dirt pile here and this dirt pile here, what did they assume? Two guys were buried. So, like Steve said, if you listen to him, there are more white markers on the Battle of the Little Bighorn battlefield than there are guys that were killed. So it's not real accurate, okay? It's a good visual, but it's not accurate. Okay, how about Thomas Weir? Anybody remember him? Okay. During the campaign of 1876, he commanded Company D. He was assigned to Captain Benteen, so he went on the left oblique. Okay. The fatigue of that campaign and the experience itself really impaired Weir's health. He showed signs of what is now called post-traumatic stress syndrome. His mental health was in shambles after this battle. After the battle, he was assigned to duty in the cavalry recruiting office in New York City. That's what they sent him to do, is recruit people into the cavalry in New York City. He really got depressed in the final months of his life. He refused to go outside. He drank unbelievably heavily. And he was so sick in his last days he couldn't even swallow. He died less than 6 months after Custer and his portion of the 7th Cavalry were killed at the Little Bighorn. He died on December 9th, 1876. He barely lived after that. He was first buried in New York City, and then they buried his remains in Brooklyn, New York in the 1880s. So he's buried in Brooklyn, New York. He died a shattered individual. 6 months, less than 6 months after the battle. How about Frederick Benteen? We talked a little bit about this. He testified at the Reno Court of Inquiry. And what the Reno Court of Inquiry was Reno's trial, trying to acquit him of all this bad stuff he supposedly did. Okay? And that happened in 1879 in Chicago. After the war, he was appointed Major of the 9th Cavalry in 1882, but he was suspended in 1884 for 1 year at half pay for drunken and disorderly conduct. He retired on disability on July 7, 1888, and moved to Atlanta, Georgia. He was promoted to breveted Brigadier General on February 27, 1890, and they gave him that promotion in recognition of his gallant service at the Battle of the Little Bighorn and against the Nez Perce Indians at the Canyon Creek fight in September of 1877. Unfortunately, we didn't get to that. That's happening still, to fly the Nez Perce. I could teach a semester class on Native Americans without question. I could take a whole semester and tell you this story. From the Custer battlefield to the Nez Perce fight with Chief Joseph to the Wounded Knee battle. I mean, you could start all the way back and really cover some material. Benteen died. He was 63 years old. He died on June 22nd, 1898 in Atlanta of heart disease. And he was originally buried in Atlanta, but guess where he's buried now? And we're going to go see him. Arlington National Cemetery. So we'll get a chance to see him next year. That'll be kind of fun. Marcus Reno. In most circles, he was blamed for Custer's defeat. He was charged with cowardice, dereliction of duty, and disobeying orders. Because of the charges, he requested this court of inquiry in 1879 to try to clear his name. Benteen testified in Reno's defense at that court of inquiry, and Major Reno was cleared of all charges. So you'd think his life would be great. Unfortunately, things got worse. The criticism continued even though he was cleared. Many of his former friends avoided him. His wife died, as I think Steve told you that, which was a depressing thing for him. His only son moved to a distant part of the country. Didn't really want to be around his father because of the allegations. He began to drink heavily, became very depressed. They finally convicted him of what people called a very flimsy morals charge, and he was dishonorably discharged from the Army. And he later developed cancer and died a friendless, broken man, buried in a poor man's grave in Washington, D.C. Pauper's grave, that's what Steve said, poor man's grave. Well, finally, his descendants, some interested individuals and some different organizations cleared him of all charges. His dishonorable discharge was reversed by the military to an honorable discharge. Obviously, he was dead at the time, so he never saw it. And then he was exhumed from his lowly Washington, D.C. grave, and he was buried with full military honors at Custer Battlefield National Cemetery on September 9th, 1967. And I wasn't trying to be odd or overly emotional, but what would he have thought when Madison read that poem at his grave on Friday? Would he ever have dreamed that an AP honors type U.S. history class from Wyoming would ever stand over his grave and speak well of it? Do you think that's what he thought at his death? I hope to heck he was able to hear your words, Madison, because I think it would have meant a lot to him. Libby Custer, whatever became of Libby Custer? Pretty good story also. She outlived her husband by 57 years. Never remarried. Following her husband's death, she learned that President Grant had charged him responsible for the loss of his men's lives at the Little Bighorn, and she went to work entirely to defend her husband's reputation and transform him into a hero. She dedicated her life to memorializing her husband and what he did. Steve said it right. A couple things I really took what he said. Hope you did too. He was not a stupid man. Even though you graduate last in your class in West Point, somebody's got to be last, right? That's West Point. So if you graduate last in your class of heart doctory, are you still a heart doctor and you have the ability to operate and fix the heart? That's his point. He was not a stupid man in any way, shape, or form. And he is very much judged by one battle because he was a hero in the Civil War. 11 horses shot out from under him, won every battle he was in. You know the Jeb Stuart story at Gettysburg. But he screwed this up. But did he screw it up? Did he have the authority to do what he did? He really did. He didn't disobey any orders. They all could act independently. Now somebody asked me a really good question. I can't remember. It might have been Gracie. Said, well, why would these guys criticize when Custer split up the 7th Cavalry? Why would Custer be criticized for attacking? Because he had the right to act independently. Well, the Dakota column and the Montana column and the Wyoming column had the right to act independently, but you couldn't act independently amongst what? The 7th Cavalry. One commander told you what to do. So, who knows? Libby Custer hated Marcus Reno. She hated Frederick Benteen. She said they were cowards, that their orders were to provide support for her husband. As we mentioned on the battlefield, she was just furious when that Reno-Benteen memorial went up. She called it a memorial for cowards. Her philosophy was they were given orders. Weir was correct. Go to the sound of the firing. The historians will tell you that'd have been great, and then you would have had the whole Reno command wiped out as well, and probably Benteen's command, because they had no shot. Who knows? If they'd have stormed down there, maybe the Indians would have dispersed. but maybe they would not have. Nobody can tell history, right? But anyway, she thought it was outrageous. In 1885, she published a book entitled Boots and Saddles. This portrayed her husband as an exemplary son, brother, husband, and commanding officer. She became very wealthy. I think Steve told you she died with $130,000 in the bank. I hope I die with $130,000 in the bank, but who knows? That was a long time ago. And she had access to the President of the United States at any time she wanted during her life. All she had to do was call and get an appointment. She could see the President at any time. She worked diligently with Congress to put monuments together at West Point and at the battlefield area to honor her husband. Finally, on April 4th, 1933, at the age of 93, she died. And prior to that, women could not be buried at West Point. And after she died, Congress passed laws stating that women could be buried next to their husbands. And she became the first woman ever buried at West Point. Okay? Now I'm going to read this to you and it would be just about perfect. I want you to think about these things. There was a severe grass fire at the battle site Montana in the 1980s, 1983. And after that, a major archaeological digs occurred at that battle, which had not occurred any time from 1876 to 1983, nothing. Now, were people out there doing things? They were, illegally. Lots have been finding all kinds of things. But several things were discovered during that archaeological dig that really shed light on what happened on June 25th, 1876. Specific locations of both warriors and troopers were determined along with the flight of the battle until its gruesome end. And during the archaeological digs in the 1980s, several things were discovered concerning arms used at the battle site. Now, the Army had 1873 Springfield carbine, 45-70 ammunition, and 45-shot pistol ammunition. Here's what it is right here. I'll show you. These are duds, but these I'll pass them around. These are 45-70 cartridges. This is what went into the breech loaders. And we have a little barbecue in my house. I'll show you that gun. These are the 45s that went into the pistols. This is all that the Army had. So if they found any other cartridges, who did they belong to? Indians. Okay.
Didn't the officers have their own guns?
Yeah, but not a lot, not enough, not enough, but a little bit. So in addition to those cartridges that I just handed out, they found Henry repeating rifles at the Little Bighorn, Colt open-top 1872 model rifles, Sharps carbines, Spencer carbines. They were the most notable weapons used by the warriors. 47 different types of ammunition, shell casings, were found during that dig. 47. How many other than Buck's good point about maybe some here's or theirs? How many did the Army have? 2. The 45 pistol and the 45-70 rifle. 45 other shell casings found. Well, that's something to think about. They said that the Indian warriors have had over 200 multiple shot rifles that could fire 16 shots in the time that a soldier took to jam one of those 45-70s in, cock it, and shoot it. 200 multiple shot rifles that could fire 16 to 1.
Didn't the Indians get the weapons from the dead soldiers though?
Some of them, but they found those cartridges also. But those weren't any good. Those were too damn slow.
No, how did they get weapons that had other cartridges?
Oh, because they traded for them, took them from the Fetterman dead. You don't think some of those rifles from the Fetterman battle weren't used against Custer? You should took them from the Battle of the Rosebud.
So Custer's group had a different than, okay.
Yeah, they did, yeah. Now, as a result of all this information, it was clear to say that Custer and the 7th Cavalry had no chance, 0 chance against these guys, 0. And the thing was, they could tell where a soldier was standing, because if they had a 45-70 trapdoor and they found all kinds of shells right here in this circle, what did that tell you? That told you the trooper was standing right here. If they found all kinds of Henry's repeating rifles in a circle there shooting this away, more than likely we had a thing. It totally reconstructed how it went. Before 1983, the talk that Steve Adelson gave you about what happened at Little Bighorn was not very clear. Much clearer what happened because they followed the trail of the bullets. Okay? So anyway, that's my story. But to think about that, 47 different types. I would encourage you, if you enjoyed that trip, it's not that far away. Grab your parents, grab your friends, brothers and sisters, take them there. You're the expert now, you've been through it. You know all about what happened. Okay, what we're gonna do tomorrow is we're gonna kick butt and take names, and we're gonna start with politics, war with Spain, and presidential assassinations. Up to 1900. We had 2 presidential assassinations during that time. We went to war with Spain, and we had a lot of political elections, and we'll tell you all about that. We'll talk about people like William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. Okay? And we're going to lecture, and then have a test and be done. Okay?